Throughout history, invisible killers have brought entire civilizations to their knees. Some pandemics reshaped the course of human civilization forever. This video covers 30 of history's deadliest plagues, from ancient pestilences that toppled empires to modern outbreaks that exposed the fragility of our interconnected world. Each story reveals how disease changed everything. The Plague of Athens. The year is 430 BCE. Athens stands as the jewel of the ancient world. Then something arrives from Ethiopia that will kill 1 in 3 Athenians. The plague strikes during the Peloponnesian War, when Athens has retreated behind its walls. Overcrowding turns the city into a death trap. Historians describe victims developing high fever, then terrible thirst, then bleeding from the mouth. Bodies pile up in temples. The sick are abandoned in the streets. Physician Hippocrates himself cannot identify the disease. The Athenian leader Pericles dies in the outbreak. The plague returns in waves over 3 years, killing an estimated 75,000 to 100,000 people. Modern scientists debate whether it was typhoid, Ebola, or something else entirely. What's certain is this: the Plague of Athens broke the power of history's first democracy and changed the outcome of a war that shaped Western civilization. The Antonine Plague. Roman legions returned from campaign in 165 CE carrying more than spoils of war. They bring back a disease that will kill 5 million people across the empire. Physicians describe pustules covering the entire body. Victims die within days of infection. The outbreak ravages Rome for 15 years. Emperor Marcus Aurelius himself succumbs to the disease in 180 CE. His physician Galen leaves detailed accounts of symptoms matching smallpox or measles. Roman armies lose so many soldiers they begin recruiting gladiators and bandits. Trade routes empty. Villages are abandoned across Europe and North Africa. The plague returns in waves for decades. By the time it ends, the Roman Empire has lost up to 1/3 of its population in some regions. The Antonine Plague marks the beginning of Rome's long decline, weakening the empire that once seemed eternal. The Plague of Cyprian. Another pandemic strikes Rome just 80 years later. Named after the bishop who chronicled it, the Plague of Cyprian emerges in 249 CE. It spreads even faster than the Antonine outbreak. Witnesses describe bleeding from the eyes and ears. Victims suffer severe diarrhea and gangrene. At its peak, 5,000 people die daily in Rome alone. The plague rages for nearly 20 years. It depopulates entire regions of the empire. Christian communities bury the dead, while pagan Romans flee in terror. This compassion helps Christianity spread during the crisis. The outbreak accelerates Rome's collapse. Farms lie abandoned. The military cannot recruit. Germanic tribes begin their invasions. Modern analysis of ancient DNA suggests the pathogen might have been a hemorrhagic fever similar to Ebola. The Plague of Cyprian demonstrated that even the mightiest empire could be brought to its knees by microscopic enemies. The Justinian Plague. Constantinople, 541 CE. The Byzantine Empire controls half the known world. Then rats carrying infected fleas arrive from Egypt. This is humanity's first recorded encounter with bubonic plague. The disease spreads with terrifying speed through the densest city on earth. Victims develop black swellings in their groins and armpits. Fever and delirium follow within hours. The Byzantine historian Procopius records 10,000 deaths per day at the outbreak's peak. Bodies overflow from churches and fill trenches outside the city walls. Ships are loaded with corpses and sent out to sea. Emperor Justinian himself contracts the plague but survives. His dreams of restoring the Roman Empire die with the plague's victims. The pandemic spreads along trade routes to every shore of the Mediterranean. It reaches as far as Denmark and Ireland. Modern estimates place the death toll at 25 to 50 million people, nearly half the population of Europe. The plague returns in waves for 2 centuries. The Justinian plague ended the ancient world and plunged Europe into the Dark Ages. The Plague of Emmaus. A severe epidemic strikes the Byzantine Empire in 639 CE. Known as the Plague of Emos, it emerges in Palestine near the town of Emos during the Muslim conquest. Arab armies and Byzantine forces both suffer massive casualties from disease rather than battle. The outbreak spreads across Syria, Iraq, and Egypt. Contemporary accounts describe it as even more virulent than previous plague waves. Entire military camps are wiped out. The Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab's army loses thousands of soldiers. His commander Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah dies from the disease. The plague kills an estimated 25,000 people in Syria alone. It fundamentally shifts the balance of power in the region. The weakened Byzantine forces cannot hold Palestine. Islamic expansion accelerates partly because the plague devastates their opponents. The Plague of Emos changed the religious map of the Middle East forever. The Japanese smallpox epidemic. In 735 CE, smallpox reaches Japan for the first time. Korean fishermen bring the virus to Kyushu Island. Japan has no immunity to the disease. The epidemic spreads along trade routes to the capital at Nara. Court officials die in huge numbers. The government nearly collapses. Buddhist priests fall sick while caring for victims. Construction stops on the great Buddha statue in Nara. The outbreak kills approximately 1/3 of Japan's population over 2 years. Some estimates suggest 1 million deaths. The imperial family itself loses multiple members. The ruling Fujiwara clan is nearly wiped out. Japanese society blames divine punishment. The government orders construction of temples across the country to appease the gods. The smallpox epidemic reshaped Japanese politics and accelerated the spread of Buddhism throughout the islands. The Black Death, the deadliest outbreak in human history, begins in China in 1334. Mongol trade routes carry infected fleas west across Asia. By 1347, the plague reaches the Black Sea. Italian merchants fleeing a siege bring the disease to Europe on ships. The pestilence spreads from Sicily across the continent in 3 years. Bubonic plague causes grotesque swellings. Pneumonic plague attacks the lungs and spreads through coughing. Septicemic plague poisons the blood and kills within hours. Medieval physicians have no idea what causes it. Some blame bad air. Others blame Jews and trigger pogroms. The rich flee cities. The poor die in their hovels. Entire villages are wiped out. Priests and doctors die trying to help. By 1353, the Black Death has killed 75 to 200 million people. Up to 60% of Europe's population. Labor shortages break the feudal system. Survivors demand higher wages. The Catholic Church loses authority when prayers prove useless. Art becomes obsessed with death. The Black Death ended the Middle Ages and forced the birth of the modern world. The Great Plague of London. Plague never truly leaves Europe. After the Black Death, outbreaks flare up every generation for 3 centuries. The last major European epidemic strikes London in 1665. Summer heat intensifies the outbreak. By August, 7,000 people die weekly. The poor suffer worst in cramped neighborhoods. Red crosses mark infected houses. Families are sealed inside with the sick. Carts roll through streets at night collecting corpses. The cry, "Bring out your dead," echoes through empty lanes. Doctors wearing bird-like masks filled with herbs try to treat the dying. The plague spreads to villages as Londoners flee. King Charles II and the wealthy retreat to the countryside. Samuel Pepys documents the horror in his famous diary. The outbreak kills approximately 100,000 people, a quarter of London's population. The plague ends abruptly with the Great Fire of London in 1666. The fire destroys the wooden slums where rats thrived. The Great Plague of London marked the end of medieval diseases in Western Europe. The Great Plague of Marseille. One last major plague outbreak strikes Western Europe in 1720. A merchant ship called the Grand Saint Antoine arrives in Marseille carrying silk and cotton from Syria. The ship also carries infected rats. Port authorities initially quarantine the vessel, but merchants pressure officials to unload the valuable cargo early. Plague spreads through Marseille within weeks. The city's dense population accelerates transmission. Authorities build a plague wall to contain the outbreak. They station guards to shoot anyone trying to flee. The sick are confined to hospitals that become death houses. Entire neighborhoods are burned. Bodies are collected by convicts who receive pardons for the dangerous work. The outbreak spreads to province and kills 100,000 people across the region. Marseille loses half its population of 90,000 residents. The plague finally burns out in 1722. The Great Plague of Marseille was Western Europe's final brush with the medieval plague that had haunted it for 4 centuries. Cocoliztli epidemics. Between 1545 and 1576, a series of devastating epidemics ravaged Mexico and Central America. The Aztecs call it Cocoliztli, meaning pestilence, in Nahuatl. The disease causes high fever, bleeding from the nose and ears, and death within days. The first outbreak in 1545 kills an estimated 5 to 15 million people. A second wave strikes in 1576 and kills another 2 to 5 million. The indigenous population had already been decimated by smallpox decades earlier. Cocoliztli deals another catastrophic blow. Spanish colonists remain largely unaffected. Modern DNA analysis suggests the pathogen might have been a form of typhoid fever or a hemorrhagic virus. The epidemics depopulate vast regions of New Spain. Entire towns vanish. Agricultural production collapses. The Spanish colonial system nearly fails from lack of labor. The Cocoliztli epidemics helped erase the last remnants of pre-Columbian civilization in Mexico. Smallpox in the New World. When Spanish conquistadors land in the Americas, they carry a weapon deadlier than guns. Smallpox has circulated in Europe for centuries. Native Americans have no immunity whatsoever. The virus spreads ahead of European armies. Entire villages die before ever seeing a white face. The Aztec Empire falls partly because smallpox kills millions in Tenochtitlan. Inca society collapses as the disease races south. Witnesses describe streets choked with corpses. Some estimates suggest 90% of the indigenous population dies within a century of contact. The outbreak continues for 400 years. Smallpox reaches every corner of the Americas. It devastates the Pacific Islands. It weakens Native American resistance to colonization. The disease doesn't just kill millions. It destroys entire civilizations and ways of life. The introduction of smallpox to the New World ranks among history's greatest demographic catastrophes. The Great Plague of Milan. Northern Italy suffers a catastrophic plague outbreak from 1629 to 1631. The epidemic arrives with German and French soldiers during the 30 Years' War. Milan initially tries to hide the outbreak to avoid trade embargoes. By the time authorities admit the crisis, the plague has spread uncontrollably. The sick are quarantined in a massive pest house outside the city. Guards prevent anyone from leaving. The dead are buried in mass graves or burned. The city's population drops from 130,000 to 60,000 in 2 years. Nearby cities suffer equally. Venice loses 46,000 people, 1/3 of its population. The plague spreads across northern Italy. The region loses approximately 1 million people. The outbreak devastates the Italian economy. The Renaissance cities never fully recover their former wealth and power. The Great Plague of Milan demonstrated that plague remained a constant threat, even in Europe's most advanced cities. The Great Plague of Seville, Spain's wealthiest city, falls victim to plague in 1647. Seville serves as the gateway to Spanish America and its gold. The plague likely arrives on ships from North Africa. The outbreak spreads rapidly through overcrowded working-class neighborhoods. Authorities seal infected houses with families inside. The wealthy flee to countryside estates. By 1649, the plague has killed 60,000 of Seville's 130,000 residents. Trade with the Americas grinds to a halt. Ships sit empty in the harbor. The city's famous silk industry collapses. Seville never regains its position as Spain's commercial capital. The economic center shifts to Cadiz and Madrid. The Great Plague of Seville marked the beginning of Spain's long economic decline from its golden age. The yellow fever epidemics. Yellow fever arrives in the Americas from Africa on slave ships. The disease thrives in tropical climates where mosquitoes breed. The first major epidemic strikes Barbados in 1647, killing thousands. Outbreaks devastate Caribbean islands throughout the 1600s and 1700s. The disease spreads to continental ports. Philadelphia suffers a catastrophic outbreak in 1793 that kills 5,000 people, 10% of the city's population. The federal government flees. George Washington evacuates. Bodies lie in streets because gravediggers have died. Yellow fever strikes New Orleans repeatedly, killing 40,000 over multiple outbreaks. Memphis loses 5,000 residents in 1878. The disease spreads through the Mississippi River Valley. Coastal cities from Boston to Charleston report outbreaks. Yellow fever blocks European colonization of West Africa for centuries. The disease helps Haiti defeat Napoleon's armies. The epidemic continues until scientists discover mosquitoes transmit the virus in 1900. Yellow fever shaped the demographic and political development of the Americas from Africa on slave ships. The disease thrives in tropical climates where mosquitoes breed. The first major epidemic strikes Barbados in 1647, killing thousands. Outbreaks devastate Caribbean islands throughout the 1600s and 1700s. The disease spreads to continental ports. Philadelphia suffers a catastrophic outbreak in 1793 that kills 5,000 people, 10% of the city's population. The federal government flees. George Washington evacuates. Bodies lie in streets because gravediggers have died. Yellow fever strikes New Orleans repeatedly, killing 40,000 over multiple outbreaks. Memphis loses 5,000 residents in 1878. The disease spreads through the Mississippi River Valley. Coastal cities from Boston to Charleston report outbreaks. Yellow fever blocks European colonization of West Africa for centuries. The disease helps Haiti defeat Napoleon's armies. The epidemic continues until scientists discover mosquitoes transmit the virus in 1900. Yellow fever shaped the demographic and political development of the Americas. The third plague pandemic. Bubonic plague strikes China's Yunnan province in 1855. By 1894, it reaches Hong Kong and enters the age of steam travel. Ships carry infected rats to every port on Earth. The pandemic spreads across 6 continents over the next 50 years. India suffers worst, with over 12 million deaths confirmed. Major outbreaks hit San Francisco, Sydney, and Cape Town. This time, science fights back. French researcher Alexandre Yersin discovers the plague bacterium in Hong Kong. He proves rats and fleas spread the disease. Public health campaigns launch rat extermination programs. Quarantines isolate ships and neighborhoods. Antibiotics finally arrive in the 1940s. The pandemic officially ends in 1960, though isolated cases still occur. The third plague pandemic killed approximately 15 million people worldwide. It demonstrated both the power of modern epidemiology and the speed with which diseases spread in a globalized world. The Russian flu of 1889. The first pandemic of the industrial age emerges in Russia in May 1889. Railways and steamships spread it globally within 4 months. The outbreak begins in St. Petersburg, then races across Europe. It reaches North America by December. Symptoms include fever, fatigue, and respiratory distress. The disease spreads faster than any previous pandemic. It strikes in waves over 4 years. Schools and businesses close. Hospitals overflow. Newspapers publish daily death counts. The pandemic kills approximately 1 million people worldwide. Scientists initially blame influenza. Modern research suggests it might have been a coronavirus, possibly the first human spillover of a bovine coronavirus. The Russian flu demonstrated that modern transportation created new vulnerabilities. Diseases could now circle the globe in weeks rather than years. The Manchurian plague. A terrifying pneumonic plague outbreak strikes northeast China in 1910. The disease spreads through coughing and kills within 24 hours of symptoms appearing. The outbreak begins among hunters in Manchuria who catch plague from marmots. Railways carry infected passengers to cities. The disease spreads to Harbin, a major railway hub. Bodies pile up faster than they can be buried. International powers with interests in China panic. Russia and Japan close borders. The Chinese government appoints Dr. Wu Lian-ti to fight the outbreak. He discovers plague spreads through the air and mandates face masks. He orders cremation of bodies despite cultural taboos. These measures work. The epidemic ends by April 1911 after killing 60,000 people. Dr. Wu's response becomes a model for modern epidemiology. The Manchurian plague demonstrated that respiratory diseases posed unique challenges requiring different containment strategies. The encephalitis lethargica epidemic. A mysterious disease emerges during World War I and haunts the world for a decade. Encephalitis lethargica first appears in Vienna in 1915. Patients fall into strange states between sleep and waking. Some become living statues, unable to move. Others cannot sleep for weeks. Many develop severe psychiatric symptoms. Children make up a significant portion of victims. The disease spreads globally during the 1918-1928 period. It infects approximately 1 million people. About 1/3 die in the acute phase. Survivors often develop severe Parkinson's-like symptoms years later. Famous neurologist Oliver Sacks later treats survivors with L-DOPA and documents their stories in his book, Awakenings. The cause of the epidemic remains disputed. Some researchers suggest it was an autoimmune response to Streptococcus bacteria. Others believe it was a novel virus. Encephalitis lethargica vanished as mysteriously as it appeared. The epidemic left thousands imprisoned in their own bodies. The Spanish flu. World War I ends, but a deadlier enemy emerges in 1918. An unusually virulent influenza strain infects 500 million people, 1/3 of humanity. Despite its name, the pandemic likely starts at a Kansas military base. Wartime censorship suppresses news, except in neutral Spain, hence the name. Soldiers in trenches spread it across Europe. Ships carry it worldwide. The virus kills the young and healthy, not just the elderly. Victims drown in fluid filling their lungs. Some die within hours of first symptoms. Bodies turn blue from lack of oxygen. The second wave in autumn 1918 proves deadliest. Philadelphia's morgues overflow with corpses. Mass graves are dug in cities worldwide. India loses 17 million people. Remote Arctic communities are wiped out. The pandemic kills between 50 and 100 million people in 2 years, more than the entire war. It infects President Woodrow Wilson during peace negotiations. The Spanish flu remains the deadliest pandemic in modern history and a constant reminder of influenza's potential. The polio epidemics. Poliomyelitis haunts the early 20th century with increasing ferocity. The disease had existed for millennia, but explodes into epidemics after 1900. Better hygiene paradoxically increases vulnerability by reducing childhood exposure. The virus spreads through contaminated water and feces. Most infected people show no symptoms, but some develop paralysis that strikes suddenly. Children wake unable to move their legs. Iron lungs keep patients breathing when chest muscles fail. President Franklin D. Roosevelt contracts polio in 1921 and loses use of his legs. Summer becomes terror season as parents keep children from swimming pools and movie theaters. The 1952 epidemic in the United States paralyzes 20,000 children. Hospitals overflow with patients in iron lungs. Dr. Jonas Salk develops the first successful vaccine in 1955. Mass vaccination campaigns begin immediately. Dr. Albert Sabin creates an oral vaccine in 1961. Global polio cases plummet from hundreds of thousands to just dozens per year. The fight against polio demonstrated that vaccines could eliminate devastating diseases entirely. The Asian flu. A new influenza strain emerges in Guizhou, China in February 1957. It spreads to Hong Kong, then jumps globally. The H2N2 virus contains genes from avian influenza. It causes 2 waves of infection. The first wave hits in spring 1957. Schools close across America as children fall ill. Hospitals prepare for the autumn surge. Scientists develop a vaccine within months, the first time vaccines combat a pandemic in real time. The vaccine campaign saves countless lives, but cannot stop the outbreak. The Asian flu kills approximately 1 million people worldwide before burning out in 1958. About 116,000 Americans die. The pandemic exposes gaps in global health surveillance. It leads to improved WHO coordination. The Asian flu proved that vaccines could limit, but not prevent pandemic spread. The Hong Kong flu. Just 11 years later, influenza strikes again. The H3N2 strain emerges in Hong Kong in July 1968. It spreads through Southeast Asia, then reaches California by returning troops. The virus causes milder symptoms than the 1957 pandemic. Many infected people keep working and spreading disease. The outbreak peaks during the 1968-69 winter. Schools and businesses stay open despite rising deaths. The pandemic receives little media attention. The moon landing and Vietnam War dominate headlines. Modern hygiene and medical care reduce mortality compared to previous pandemics. Approximately 1 million people die worldwide. About 100,000 deaths occur in the United States. The Hong Kong flu demonstrated that even mild pandemics kill vast numbers. The H3N2 virus continues circulating today as seasonal flu. The smallpox eradication endgame. While smallpox killed 300 million people in the 20th century, a global campaign wages war against the ancient scourge. The WHO launches an intensive eradication program in 1967. The strategy involves surveillance, containment, and ring vaccination around cases. Health workers travel to remote villages across Africa and Asia. They search for every last case. Somalia reports the last natural case of smallpox in 1977. A laboratory accident in England causes 2 final cases in 1978. On May 8, 1980, the WHO declares smallpox eradicated, the only human disease ever eliminated. The achievement saves an estimated 5 million lives annually that smallpox would have claimed. Vaccination ends worldwide. The last remaining samples are secured in 2 high-security laboratories. The eradication of smallpox stands as humanity's greatest public health triumph. The HIV/AIDS pandemic. A new disease appears in American hospitals in 1981. Previously healthy young men develop rare cancers and pneumonia. Their immune systems have mysteriously failed. Scientists identify human immunodeficiency virus in 1983. The virus destroys the body's defenses, allowing opportunistic infections to kill. HIV spreads through blood and sexual contact. Initial cases cluster in gay communities, leading to stigma and denial. The virus had actually jumped from primates to humans in Africa decades earlier. It spread silently worldwide before detection. The 1980s see panic and misinformation. AIDS becomes a death sentence. Entire communities are devastated. Rock Hudson dies in 1985, bringing mainstream attention. Freddie Mercury dies in 1991. Basketball star Magic Johnson announces his infection the same year. AIDS ravages Africa. Activists fight for research funding and treatment. The first effective drugs arrive in the mid-1990s. Modern antiretroviral therapy allows infected people to live normal lifespans. However, the pandemic continues. HIV has infected over 85 million people since its discovery. Approximately 40 million have died. About 39 million people currently live with HIV. Sub-Saharan Africa suffers most, with entire generations lost to AIDS. The HIV's/AIDS pandemic revealed both medical science's potential and society's capacity for prejudice. The SARS outbreak. A mysterious pneumonia emerges in Guangdong Province, China in November 2002. By February 2003, a doctor who treated patients brings it to Hong Kong. He stays at the Metropole Hotel and infects 16 guests. They carry severe acute respiratory syndrome across the globe. SARS spreads to 26 countries in weeks. The virus causes severe pneumonia and kills about 10% of infected patients. Toronto experiences a major outbreak. Hospitals become infection centers. Healthcare workers die caring for patients. China initially suppresses information about the outbreak. International pressure forces transparency. The WHO issues rare travel advisories. Scientists identify a novel coronavirus as the culprit. Quarantines and travel restrictions contain the spread. The outbreak ends by July 2003. SARS infects 8,098 people and kills 774. The rapid global response prevents a pandemic. SARS demonstrated both the danger of novel coronaviruses and the effectiveness of aggressive containment measures. The swine flu of 2009. A novel H1N1 influenza strain emerges in Mexico in spring 2009. The virus contains genes from pig, bird, and human flu strains. It spreads globally within weeks. The WHO declares a pandemic by June. Unlike most flu strains, H1N1 targets the young. Children and pregnant women face highest risk. The elderly show surprising immunity from past exposures. Vaccine production races against the spreading virus. Countries stockpile antivirals. Schools close. Airports screen travelers. The pandemic proves less deadly than initial fears suggested. Modern surveillance systems track its progress in real time. Social media spreads both information and panic. Approximately 284,000 people die worldwide, far fewer than seasonal flu typically kills. The mild outcome leads to criticism of the pandemic response. Some call it overblown. Others note the response likely prevented worse outcomes. The 2009 pandemic tested global health systems and found them wanting. The West African Ebola epidemic. Ebola virus disease emerges in Guinea in December 2013. The outbreak spreads to Liberia and Sierra Leone, three of Africa's poorest countries. Ebola causes hemorrhagic fever with mortality rates up to 90%. Patients bleed from eyes, nose, and mouth. The disease spreads through contact with bodily fluids. Traditional burial practices accelerate transmission. Healthcare systems collapse under the strain. Foreign doctors and nurses arrive to help. Some contract the disease and die. 2 American aid workers are evacuated and treated successfully. A Liberian man brings Ebola to Texas in 2014. He dies and 2 nurses become infected. Panic spreads across America despite minimal risk. The outbreak finally ends in 2016. Ebola infects 28,616 people and kills 11,310 across West Africa. The epidemic exposed catastrophic failures in global health preparedness. It led to renewed investment in epidemic response systems. The Zika epidemic. A mosquito-borne virus explodes across the Americas in 2015. Zika virus had been known since 1947 but considered mild. Most infected people show no symptoms. Then Brazilian doctors notice a spike in babies born with abnormally small heads. The connection to Zika becomes clear. The virus causes devastating birth defects when pregnant women are infected. Microcephaly leaves infants with severe developmental disabilities. The epidemic spreads through Brazil, then across Latin America and the Caribbean. Cases appear in Florida and Texas. The WHO declares a public health emergency in February 2016. Countries advise women to delay pregnancy. The 2016 Olympics in Rio proceed despite concerns. Millions of people across the Americas contract Zika. Thousands of babies are born with defects. Scientists race to develop vaccines. The epidemic subsides by 2017 as populations develop immunity. Zika demonstrated how a mild disease could cause catastrophic harm to the most vulnerable. The measles resurgence. Measles once infected millions of children annually. The disease causes high fever, rash, and dangerous complications. Vaccination nearly eliminates measles from developed countries by 2000. Then anti-vaccine movements gain momentum. Parents refuse to vaccinate children based on discredited claims linking vaccines to autism. Measles cases begin climbing. The Philippines suffers a massive outbreak in 2019, killing over 400 people, most of them children. Ukraine reports over 100,000 cases. Samoa's outbreak kills 83, mostly infants. The United States sees its largest outbreak in 25 years in 2019. Measles spreads through unvaccinated communities. The disease returns to countries where it had been eliminated. The resurgence demonstrates how fragile public health gains can be. Vaccine hesitancy threatens decades of progress. Measles resurgence is entirely preventable and entirely human-caused. The cholera pandemic of Yemen. Yemen's civil war creates conditions for catastrophic disease. Cholera emerges in 2016 and explodes into the worst outbreak in modern history. The bacterial disease spreads through contaminated water. Bombing has destroyed water treatment plants and sewage systems. Millions lack clean water or sanitation. Hospitals struggle without supplies or staff. Cholera causes severe diarrhea and dehydration. Patients can die within hours without treatment. The outbreak infects over 1.2 million people by 2019. More than 2,500 die. Children make up a disproportionate number of victims. International aid agencies struggle to respond amid ongoing war. The outbreak continues in waves. Yemen's cholera epidemic shows how war and poverty create perfect conditions for disease. It demonstrates that ancient scourges return when public health infrastructure collapses. COVID-19. A pneumonia of unknown cause appears in Wuhan, China in December 2019. Chinese scientists sequence a novel coronavirus by January. The virus spreads explosively through Wuhan. China locks down entire cities. The world watches. Then Italy's hospitals overflow in February 2020. The pandemic arrives everywhere by March. Countries close borders. Cities enter lockdown. The global economy crashes. Healthcare systems buckle. Morgues fill. Refrigerated trucks store bodies in New York. The death toll climbs. Scientists develop vaccines in record time. Operation Warp Speed accelerates production. Vaccination begins by December 2020. Misinformation spreads as fast as the virus. The pandemic exposes inequality as the poor suffer most. New variants emerge, Alpha, Delta, Omicron, and others. Vaccines prevent severe disease, but not infection. The virus becomes endemic. Over 7 million confirmed deaths occur by 2024, true toll likely much higher. Millions suffer long-term effects called long COVID. The pandemic reshapes work, education, and social connection. Remote work becomes standard. Supply chains fracture. Mental health crises surge. COVID-19 demonstrated that even advanced societies remain vulnerable to infectious disease. The smallpox outbreak. In May 2022, smallpox cases begin appearing outside Africa for the first time in significant numbers. The disease was formerly called monkeypox. It typically causes painful lesions and flu-like symptoms. The virus had been confined mostly to Central and West Africa for decades. Suddenly it spreads through Europe and North America. Cases cluster initially in men who have sex with men. The outbreak raises uncomfortable questions about stigma and sexual health. The WHO declares a public health emergency in July 2022. Vaccines and treatments exist, but supply is limited. Rich countries hoard doses while Africa continues suffering the disease. The outbreak infects over 87,000 people globally by early 2023. The emergency declaration ends, but the virus continues circulating. A more dangerous strain emerges in Congo in 2024, killing hundreds. The smallpox outbreak revealed persistent gaps in global health equity and the ease with which diseases can escape endemic zones. These 30 plagues killed hundreds of millions across human history. Each pandemic exposed the fragility of civilization. Disease has toppled empires, ended eras, and redrawn maps. Plagues accelerated the fall of Rome. They enabled European conquest of the Americas. They shaped the outcome of wars. They triggered revolutions. They broke feudal systems and built modern public health. The invisible world of microbes has determined human destiny more than any army or ideology. Yet humanity survived every outbreak. We developed vaccines. We built public health systems. We learned to track and contain emerging threats. We decoded the genome. We created antibiotics. Each pandemic taught bitter lessons that saved lives in the next crisis. The story of plagues is also a story of human resilience, scientific progress, and collective action. But the threat never ends. Climate change drives animals into human territory. Urbanization creates dense populations where diseases spread explosively. Global travel spreads pathogens in hours. Factory farming creates breeding grounds for new viruses. Antibiotic resistance threatens to return us to a pre-antibiotic age. Vaccine hesitancy undermines herd immunity. The next pandemic may already be incubating somewhere, in a wet market, a factory farm, a melting permafrost, a deforested jungle. History teaches that the question isn't if another plague will come, it's when and whether we'll be ready. Comment below your city, so I know where in the world you're watching from, and tell me which historical disaster I should cover next.